Hello, everyone. We are live coming to you from all across the country. Well, at least half the country. My name's Gray. I'm the Executive Director of Worldbuilders. And as part of our capacity fundraiser, Geeks Doing Good, we wanted to have a Worldbuilders After Dark that is going to be talking about queerness and kink identity in science fiction and fantasy. And we originally thought this up just because, hey, it's a fun topic. We like to have some more adult topics in our after dark situations. And we happen to know some people that could do it. I want to say that we had originally hoped to have Jeffy Kennedy here, who is an author and the president-elect of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, but she could not join us due to unforeseen circumstances. So I also want to apologize to those who wanted to see little SciFi and Jamie talking about cosplay earlier today. That was going to be broadcast from Seattle, which you may have heard is basically the surface of the sun today. And poor Jamie's computer could not handle the streaming at that point. So we will reschedule with little SciFi and definitely have that come up again. But in the meantime, I am really happy to welcome two people who, full disclosure, are good friends of mine. Up and to my, there you are, that direction, you gotta reverse the pointings, is Midori. And Midori is a renowned educator and writer on sexuality, dubbed the Supernova of Kink by Dan Savage. She emerged from the sex-positive movement in San Francisco from the early 90s and soon became a much sought-after international presenter on sexuality, personal fulfillment, and kinky adventures. She has a lot more of her biography, but in particular, since we're kind of a literary-focused thing, I'm going to skip to the paragraph that says, her writing is extensive, ranging from numerous articles, columns, works of fiction, and instructional books. She is the author of The Seductive Art of Japanese Bondage, Wild Side Sex, Master Hand's Daughter, and the co-author of Silk Threads. Thanks for showing up, Midori.
Happy to be here.
And next to Midori is Dana Pellebon, who some of you, if you watch our streams, may have seen before. Dana Pellebon is one of the Worldbuilders Board of Directors. No, directors. She is one of the directors on the board. Is also a longtime science fiction and fantasy fan with roots in Godzilla and Star Trek. She is also a kink performer and educator. She additionally directs, writes, acts, and produces live theater and short films in the Midwest. That's her side gig. Her day job is the co-executive director of the Rape Crisis Center in Madison, Wisconsin, which is the second oldest rape crisis center in the United States. She concentrates on victim services and eradicating all forms of oppression in the community. So I am really looking forward to hearing you two trade ideas. Like I said, I've known both of you for many years, but I don't think I've ever gotten to be a fly on the wall while the two of you talk. So this is going to be great. And as always, people in chat can feel free to bring up things. So, I mean, I kind of just want to be like, so, queerness and kink identities in science fiction and fantasy. What do you think?
Launch in. Oh, and hey, viewers, I am not looking, I'm focusing on our conversation, so I'm not looking at the Twitch stream. Any questions I'm asking our lovely host to convey it to us. So if you have questions for us, make sure that you clearly state that, and Ray will restate it or repost that. Well, Dana, nice to meet you.
It is lovely to meet you. So I have heard about Midori for years, and Midori is one of my rope heroes. And so like to be in a space where I get to have a conversation is truly an honor, because you are an inspiration and truly somebody that a lot of people in the community look up to and value very deeply.
Oh, thank you. I guess if I stick around long enough and have opinions, eventually, well, I get to be somebody. I don't know. Anyhow, science fiction. And right before we went live, I discovered you have a thing for a certain beautiful reptile?
I do. Actually, today I was in a vintage shop and bought everything Godzilla in their store because I love Godzilla. I have loved Godzilla since I was like 3 years old, and it is an obsession. He is like my boyfriend. Godzilla is truly one of the things that was an in to me for science fiction, for monster movies, for horror. I love Godzilla.
And what what is Godzilla for you? What's the facets of the love?
So for me, uh, I like destroying things. I mean, I'm gonna say watching him come through cities and just take them out was hilarious for me as a kid. Also, uh, I'm a kid of divorce, and in the summer times, I would go spend the summers with my dad. And every Saturday morning, we would watch Star Trek, a Godzilla movie, a Bruce Lee movie, and then the series Kung Fu. And that's how I spent my Saturday mornings for years. And it's a bonding thing between me, my dad, and my sister. It's a fun escape. Um, it was all the things that I had never seen before as a little black kid that came from the South and the West, and it was really cool.
Uh,
Midori, what is your interaction with Godzilla?
Well, my relationship with Gojira, I was born and raised in Japan, so I'm very much imprinted from Gojira in Japan. And as such, I have also absorbed the atomic anxiety that Godzilla came into existence from. That there was this lovely little lizard minding its own business in the South Pacific atoll, and then all the nuclear experimentation. And Godzilla is grief for me.
Mm,
Godzilla is grief and anxiety of ordinary people who are helpless under the powers far beyond us. The uh, corrupt politicians, the war industry, the fear of other countries crushing us, and then so Godzilla is for me, and I think a lot of folks from Japan, isn't about a monster here to get us, but it's the monster that we could be. It's grief. It's not so much rage. It's actually grief made flesh.
Hmm.
thank you for sharing that. I mean, what I enjoy about that. So culturally, obviously, that is not my cultural perspective. So to be able to absorb that layer on top of that is is a blessing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. When I was a kid, um, I don't know how old I was. I might have been like 7 or 8 years old. And it was a beautiful summer afternoon. It must have been summer break. And in Japan, kids only get like 3 weeks for summer break because we must study past the exams. Um, but it must have been summer break. It was a beautiful summer day. The back doors were open. I was on the bed. My grandmother was sitting there, and the TV was playing. So there's the TV, and then there's the back sliding doors were open because it was a hot day, right? And it was Godzilla on the TV, and I think I fell asleep, right? Because then I woke up. I thought I woke up. I woke up
Oh.
into my dream, and when I woke up, the back door is still open, but my grandmother's nowhere to be seen. And so I walk out the back porch, and instead of the backyard, it is some decades past with fire all around and people with the earthquake safety head covering and red and black and ash and burning and people running, right? and I'm trying to find my grandmother, and I'm going against the stream of the traffic, and people running, and smoke and all of that. And then I turn a corner, and I'm on a pier or something, and suddenly everything is white. Everything is white, and I can see the outlines of the building, and I can see some people, except they're like shadows and outlines. And in the first part, when it was fire and storm and ash, I knew that somewhere out there was Gojira. And then I turn the corner and it's white, and people in shadow, like shadow form, outlines. And then I woke up. And what I ended up having was a cultural trauma dream of the dropping of the A-bomb.
Yeah.
I'm 8 years old in 1970s Japan, and I didn't have family members to my knowledge that were wiped out in it, but somehow in my dream, I ended up in the moment of that evaporation.
Wow.
We this afternoon had a conversation about comic books with Thaddeus Howes and Dao Wong. I guess it was actually this morning. And one of the things that was brought up was that there's an artist named Phil Foglio who has done many different comics. He's known well for Girl Genius and for Dungeons and Dragons comics and things like that. And one of his side projects was a thing called Xenophile, which was explicit sexual stories illustrated in a comic book format. And one of the more famous covers of that is a woman lying on the bed looking kind of come hither with a negligee that's basically made out of buildings, while next to the bed her partner is putting on a Godzilla outfit. And that every time somebody talks about Godzilla, regardless of how serious or you know, critical of the films, you know, our pandemic binge watching was going through all of the Godzilla films from the first one through the most recent anime, and I still can't help but come up with that particular image of, you know, you can turn anything into apparently an amusing fetish if you want to. I think there's a Rule 34 of that or something along those lines.
Now I'm just thinking through all of the weird fetishes that I know and have heard about.
I've actually watched a scene at a play party event. I think it was like a weekend. I can't remember what event it was, but this pair went to this extent of building cardboard buildings, and one person got to wear a Godzilla outfit, and they set up a whole town using like cardboard boxes, and they got to stop buildings. Like, they actually made this happen. It just made me so happy. Oh my God.
Nice.
It is interesting how you can incorporate your science fiction and your kink. So a while ago, I was in a burlesque group, and one of the things I did for this burlesque group is I would do rope performances. And at one of our larger festival events, I was essentially a hura, and I had my rope bunny dressed as a tribble. And so she ran around, and then I grabbed her, and then I tied her upside down and hung her from the ceiling. And it was so much fun that that people were like, oh my gosh, this is something that I know and that I recognize. And they immediately knew she was a tribble, and it was probably one of my more fun performances.
Chirp, 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 chirp,
Yes.
chirp, 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 chirp. Oh my God. Okay, so sex in science fiction and fantasy, there's just not enough of it, right? And there have been some hints at it, and we were talking right before about Torchwood.
Mm-hmm.
And Torchwood opens with interspecies gender ambiguous because aliens. And then there's Captain Jack, who essentially, well, I think with greater fuckery than Kirk.
So I'm also going to say here's the thing: the fuckery of Kirk is actually an urban myth. If you actually do an analysis of what he did in his things, Archer was the horn dog. Kirk was actually very circumspect, and that they I should say from the original series they fed into the myth with the later on movies. But I always found that interesting is that people sort of ascribed this promiscuous identity onto him that was not actually in the series itself.
Oh my God. Okay.
So let's think about that, though. So one of the things that contributed to that thought, so we know that they had the very first interracial kiss, right?
Yes.
And how women, and particularly women of color, are sexualized in almost all contexts, fetishized, not so much sexualized, and how some of that most likely transferred over to Kirk because he crossed the barrier. He went and did things that other people didn't do. How that was treated by audiences was not as this amazing moment of racial anything. It was very much he's walking on the wild side. He's doing something taboo. So when you think about how something very simple then plays into the tropes of what it was that he was sexually based on the fetishization of women of color, I think that really does kind of help explain why that trope started.
Good point. Good point. And staying in the Star Trek universe, the hints that they've given to Vulcan and Klingon mating and sex habits.
Or Cardassian, for that matter. Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm. And that something incredibly sexy for me of that highly reserved Vulcan losing it.
Yeah. The Ponfar.
Whole ritual around containing that sexual energy.
There's a scene in the I think it's The Search for Spock where they find him and to calm him down, the person starts stroking his fingers, and when they do that, I looked at it and I thought that reminded me of the scenes, the quote unquote love scenes from The Age of Innocence, which is of course about Victorian being all buttoned up and then losing it, and how when you're that buttoned up, just the act of touching a hand on skin becomes this huge deal. One of the things that we run into a lot, though, is that even when there is a queer representation, I don't know if the most egregious one I think was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but if you're going to have a lesbian relationship, then they're probably going to die. And if there's a homoerotic relationship between men, then one of them turns out to be evil, with the exception of Discovery, which, thank you, Discovery. But can you think of any exceptions to that rule or that kind of thing, or positive examples of same-sex couples?
Are you talking about TV shows and movies or books?
Both. Comics, movies, anything.
I was reading Ursula Le Guin.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Left Hand of Darkness. And Ursula's speculation into sexuality, gender. And that was written a while ago.
Yeah.
And reading that today, I found comfort in the idea that there were people before us that imagined fluidity and fluidity around desire and the body and mating, and it was was really encouraging.
Nice. Yeah, there was an interesting book. I'm not going to name the book because it would be a spoiler if I did. But the genre was a detective story set on the moon, kind of a noir detective story. And these people have full control over. They can just put their consciousness in different bodies and reshape their bodies anytime they want. And the main character, who's this hard-boiled detective, basically reaches a point where he's at a dead end in the case, and he's like, you know what? I really need a different perspective on this. I need to understand this from a different point of view. So he goes and he lays down on this beach that they have there, and the reason the beaches exist is because if you lay down there as one gender, you will wake up as the opposite gender. And so he's like, I really need to get, I need to become a woman in order to have the point of view that will actually let me solve this case. And it's just this matter of fact, it just out of the blue. There's no sign that it's coming. He's not somebody who's known for, the author's not somebody who's known for that kind of stuff. And I remember reading it and it was refreshing. It was like, not a big deal. It's just, that's the way it works. Now, of course, I don't think it would work now because there's all the cultural baggage that goes along with the oppressive systems that are built into our culture. But wouldn't it be nice to have a culture where that wasn't built in and you could have a different perspective just by embodying a different way?
Yeah, and the thrill of reading as well as creating stories for me of speculative fiction, right, is creating the technologies that I wish existed. And sex toys. Sex toys, because the second use, I believe, of any technology is either for sex or cat toys.
I mean, I have cat toys that double as sex toys.
Right? See, right? Yeah. So, second use of any technology, and I'm thinking, in science fiction and speculative fiction, we need better sex toy technology. I made up a bunch that I wish existed and stuck it in my book. But the one that I wish existed, okay, and nanotechnology and locking into nerve endings, a strap-on harness that would lock into my clitoral nerve endings.
Ooh, yeah,
right?
That would be amazing.
Because when I'm being the fucker, I want to feel it, and not just as a secondary pressure, which I try to make the best of it with, putting the harness just right and the pressure. But still, there's that.
That's a damn good toy, Midori.
Right? Yeah. I think that should exist. And if there's various technologies that allow for people with sensory and bodily incongruency or disabilities, why not?
Right.
Why not?
Absolutely.
Oh, by the way, I do need to give us all a heads up that if suddenly I yell Jack off, it is not a request. One of my cats is named Jack, and our commands for cats to stop doing things is off. And it was the second day we got him that we realized that it was going to be very funny. But Jack is a bit of an asshole and tends to attack our elderly kitty. So I may be randomly throwing stuffed animals to get him to stop being. So I may be screaming Jack off. I'm not having a Tourette's moment.
People in the chat have also brought up that there's a whole series of books by Ian M. Banks, may he rest in peace, the Culture series. And within that one, people could change sex via technology and do that kind of thing. I have to say, I also, I get really, really annoyed when I see or read any kind of fictional portrayal which basically takes Western contemporary cultural mores and applies them to some far off galaxy or some we don't even have the same mores within our, one nation in a continent, the idea that it would last for hundreds of years or things like that, when somebody is suddenly modest for a particular reason, or marriage is exactly the same way that, in 500 years in the future as it is now, is immensely annoying. It feels like a failure of the imagination. So I guess one of my questions for you both would be, have you seen the opposite happen? Is there ever a portrayal in science fiction and fantasy that you were like, yes, that's what I'd like to see?
Yeah, again, my favorite, I tend to lean towards Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as far as like a representation of sexuality, how I express it in science fiction, and queerness and blackness and kink, without hang-ups and religion and all of the things that that people put in to a space. What I would love to read is a fully actualized queer Black woman out there having sex and not worrying about all of the restrictions that are put upon us society-wise, especially in the United States. And it seems to be, no matter what and who, there is a limitation for where it is people, women, queer women, women of color can fit. So like it is right here. Sometimes you might get a little bit out of that box, but even having someone who's non-binary, I don't read fiction with non-binary because it's hard to find. So I would love to be able to write that. I'm not a writer, not in that same way. So I just keep looking for things where I go, oh, this feels like me. I can settle into this character and not be traumatized. So the subject is not about my traumatization, but instead is about my liberation.
See, those stories are out there. They have been written, but part of the challenge is the gatekeeping, right? Because if it's TV shows, series, or movies, it's producer in Hollywood going, no. And if it's traditional publishing, which is unraveling and evolving into something we don't know. And then also you get the publishing houses going, if it's a major publishing house, and then you get like niche publishing houses that write for niche, like Circle of Press, and then they get crushed, right? So the stories are out there. Slash fiction gives us some hope. And the change in the publishing industry, I hope. Now, what would be really cool if you, as you say, you're not a writer, but you envision things. If you pair with somebody who can, kind of like a librettist to a composer in opera. That.
I mean, honestly, the way that I express is through my art, through burlesque, through live theater. And I connect with people that do that. So like Melina Williams is someone that their art connects very deeply with me, and how they express their sexuality, even though it is different from mine, was instrumental to me being able to say, this is who I am in fullness and in outness. Because it's one thing to be able to say, here is who I am, and it's another thing to be able to publicly own all of the parts of me. So you are right, they are out there. I want more. I want to see it as a part of, when I go look through books, here are 4 books just right here as I go through the section where they're immediate where it feels like me. I also probably should find more of those smaller publishing houses in my copious spare time in between theater. Yes.
I'm wondering if the Twitch viewers might have recommendations for exactly what Dana's looking for. I would also like to recommend Samuel Delaney. Currently, I'm not reading, I'm listening, because I often have to read for work, so I like to listen. And the reader is quite nice. And it opens with Black, gay, underclass, oppressed person entering into this DS slave, sex slave relationship. Boom, it goes into that really fast. And that his lovers and his fucks and his tricks have all been men, just gets handled, and it's just goes as part of the story.
Yeah, the chat brought up that, we are unfortunately in some of the publishing areas so far from that. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with the recent Heroes Don't Do That thing that came up last week. Where,
I got a little of it.
Yeah.
They were going to have a joke about Batman going down on Catwoman in season 3 of Harley Quinn, which there's some queer representation in popular culture, fiction, science fiction and stuff. But apparently an executive said heroes don't do that because he was worried they couldn't sell Batman toys if Batman engaged in cunnilingus, which is not a sentence I really ever expected to say.
I've seen many portrayals of Bruce Wayne. I have a feeling he absolutely goes down on women. I mean,
And I've also always wondered about his habit of having a ward.
Yeah.
Good daddy. Good
yes.
daddy.
Yes.
Yes. Good daddy. Because, Dick Grayson is a young man, and then there's Robin, and then when he becomes Nightwing and has the conflict with the daddy figure. I mean, classic, right? And anyway, the villains are always more interesting and have better outfits. Come on.
You're not wrong. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that it is still that way, although at the same time when, with the huge success of 50 Shades of Grey, everybody was like, by the way, no relation. They came out with, they came out with more and more stuff, and really, paranormal romance and science fiction romance, especially on ebooks, is a huge market. It's one of the few places in publishing that's actually growing, as you know. The problem is that I find that a lot of people are sort of eager to get on that bandwagon and don't really do the research or portray it in ways that, it's not even that they're inaccurate. It's just they're just bad. And so I'm kind of, have you ever come across something that was so egregious you're just like, this should never have been written, or this needs to be redone?
Well, 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
Plenty and smut. And okay, so when I'm watching movies and the bondage is bad, it takes me out of the suspension of disbelief. It drives my wife nuts when I'm like, I'll be watching a movie, right? Bad bondage.
Yeah.
There could be dragons and octopus and aliens everywhere, and they'll be like, bad bondage. I'm like, yep, lost my interest.
I think the only movie where I didn't have that was the movie Bound, because I was just so enamored with every moment of that whole movie that they could have done anything. And I would have been like, yeah, you did it wrong on purpose just to be hot in a different way.
Ooh. Dia Seduction as modeled by the Borg Queen and Data.
Oh, wow. And I mean, technically the Borg would be gender fluid? agender? I don't know. I'm not sure. What gender is the Borg? There's a question for the chat. Yeah, Lacirinic says maybe there should be intimacy editors for fiction, the same as intimacy coaches for TV and film.
Yep. So yeah, the sexual, the technical aspect of sex and kink, right? See that scene with the Borg Queen and Data, I thought that was such a brilliant, tense DS seduction. Like
just for jargon, DS refers to dominance and submission.
Yeah, dominance and submission, and I just found that so luscious.
Yeah, it's like she puts skin on him and then plays with the hairs on it and that kind of thing. Again, there you go, just the tiniest little touch.
And he's flooded with the sensations and wondering about humanness, right? And the conflict of desire. So I found that super sexy.
I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch this movie now in a whole different.
On the other hand, there's the Midori. You and I were talking about this a bit before we started. That you can you write things that you in particular, and it's a lot of times authors will write things and then they're like, look, this is a fantasy. This is an exploration of the darkness. Please don't try and emulate this. We don't want to say suddenly come up with we're all trying to be like the Tarnsman of Gore or something like that. Where's that line between exploring the shadow and writing something that is, I don't know, just plain, misogynist or something like that?
Before going into that, have you all read The Houseplant of Gore?
Houseplant of Gore. Is that actually a book? I thought it was just a joke.
It's a spoof that's been written.
Oh.
And I have actually heard Cecilia Tan and Laura Antoniou do readings of Houseplant of Gore.
Oh my God. For those who don't know, the Gore books, I've heard that they started out as a joke, that John Norman said he could write a book that was so bad that people would still publish it. And so he did, and they did, and it became a series that then became what I call one-handed reading for a lot of people. So
I don't mind the one-handed reading, but what I mind is when people base real relational structure and how they interact with other actual humans based upon that fiction. That's the problem. But yes, Houseplant of Gore, I highly recommend a table reading of Houseplant of Gore. You will not water me, I will water you. You will not water me, you shall be watered.
I have found the Goodreads, and by the way, it has a 4.33 rating on Goodreads. So
it is worth a performance.
Yes.
In fact, I think that might make a really interesting burlesque performance.
Well, I've written it down so that I can remember and go back and do something with it. So yes.
So back to the original topic before I derailed it with Houseplant of Gore, which is a treasure. Writing the improbable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the improbable all right, so one of my day jobs is teaching sexuality. So I do the instructional books of things that you can actually explore. Then I have other books where I have to say, do not do anything in this book. Immoral, amoral, illegal, improbable, impossible. Please don't do anything in this book, because I have used that book and short stories as a place to, a deposit place of my shadow appetites. And I love my shadow side, and I want to be able to explore it, but I do not want people to do any of it.
what I find is that
Except for
people,
the strap-on. Somebody needs to develop that strap-on.
that I agree with. I find that people read kinky fiction and think that it's easy, where it's like, oh yeah, I'll just go get a paddle and I will bring this. That was the thing that most annoyed me about 50 Shades of Grey. So then they put out this marketing line. Oh my God, I love you so much. Look at that. Exactly. And it's Alvin and Chip.
Chip
Oh
and
my
Dale.
gosh.
Oh my God. It's the Chip and Dales. Oh my God.
Is that Chip and Dale?
Chip and Dale.
Oh, see, that's perfect.
You know, I didn't think to ask our community manager about the guidelines for Twitch, but I don't think that there's anything against, having little stuffed animals.
I mean, it's not like we're doing it. The stuffed
Yeah, there you
animals
go.
there. But one of the things that I learned about flogging was that I had to learn about flogging. I had to learn where it is I could and could not strike people. I had to learn how to utilize the implement. So your point about whatever is in this book, do not do, it's also when you see things and you are reading things that sound really cool and you want to try them out with your partners, look for kink educators like Midori, because you do need that education, because it's not just as simple as I'm going to go jump in bed, I'm going to grab a flogger, and then we're going to recreate this amazing scene. You're not. You can very easily hurt your partner. And fantasy is wonderful, but having a base of knowing what you're doing is really important, especially when it comes to consent and how that looks and what that feels like. Be sure that you are reaching out for that education above and beyond that fantasy.
I would say that goes for writing about this stuff either, too. I mean, if you want to write a scene like that, make sure that you go to the people that actually know about it and ask them.
Smut and porn is not sex ed. It's sources of inspiration. And as sources of inspiration, let us celebrate it. Much in the way that Fast and Furious is not driver's ed.
Yes.
Yes.
And I am a middle-aged Asian woman driving a Volvo.
Which you can still Fast and Furious that if you really wanted to. Just saying.
I'm not that kind of Asian. Different kind of Asian. I'm the one that's going. I'm the one that makes you furious in a four-way stop.
Oh, go ahead.
I often hear good discussions around consent in fiction. I like writing and enjoying fantasies around things that are not okay in real life.
Right.
And I think there's definitely a place for fiction that models excellent behavior, but aliens should not have to abide by that. That reminded me actually of authors researching and egregious kink. All right, Sleeping Beauty, Anne Rice. Love the opening scene. And I could only go about, I kind of struggled through the end of book 1. Book 2, I couldn't even, because the way that people were suspended and I couldn't stop thinking about shoulder dislocation and when do you get to poo and pee? Oh my God. And I couldn't get past that, right? And in biological functions, there's an opportunity to exploit that in a plot line of a supposed in a time long ago, right? Of course, if it's sometime in the future where I can alter my elimination function, okay. But yeah, bondage and the kink in that, just after a while, I just couldn't.
It was actually that book. I had mentioned that book to Gray when I first met, one of the first times I met Gray, and Gray was like, no, you cannot. And then he handed me Laura Antonou's book. He said, this is what you need to read instead. This is what this looks like in a real sense.
That opening scene, though, that's good.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I full disclosure, I definitely, I have actually gone through several copies of that trilogy because of Anne Rice's trilogy, because I would read it and I'd be like, oh, this is terrible, I can't possibly have this in my house, and I'd throw it away, and I'd be like, well, maybe I need to read that again, and I'd buy another copy. So I've given her lots of my money for that reason. And I think that actually is part of the reason why I think that it is somewhat necessary. For all that I have some issues with Anne Rice's philosophies, she also wrote a book called Exit to Eden,
Oh, yeah.
which is unfortunately made into a very bad movie. But in that book, it was very much a love story slash adventure thing. And the fact that it was within a kink context was just, ancillary to it. It was not the focus of the book. And it's that kind of representation where you can go, oh, hey, people actually do this. I think to some extent with all of its issues, what was the Secretary was kind of like that. Like they ended up with a happily ever after ending, happily ever after. In that, with all of the problems with some of the portrayals of things in there and unrealistic things.
Not my favorite, but that's because that's just a personal taste thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just a personal taste thing. Because, of course, on the other hand, I like Caligula, so which was my first exposure to fisting. And somebody was playing it on the dorm TV on the first week of my freshman year.
Whoa. Eyes wide, huh? Or, yeah, there's another bad one. Eyes wide shut. Oh, not.
Yeah. Actually, there was a really good, fun, kinky sex representation recently in, what was that? It's a heist movie with a bunch of women, and Anne Hathaway is playing
Ocean's 8? Or
Ocean's, one of the Oceans.
I think it was Ocean's 8, yeah.
And there's this hot little scene where Anne Hathaway as like, and she's kind of mocking the way that media has portrayed her as this like fragile, tense princess. And she and her boyfriend character, and they're doing kinky sex stuff in the bedroom, and she's the top, and he's like handcuffed and ooh sexy. And then she leaves him handcuffed as part of the plot line. And that kink was actually pretty realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the heist was a heist movie. I love a good heist movie. But that was I really liked that little kink portrayal. And it wasn't made evil. It wasn't scandalized. It was just like these two people happen to be fucking. And this person used it as a honeypot decoy.
Wow.
My breaking moment for kink actually happened when I was 5. And my dad, who was not the smartest sometimes, took me to see heavy metal. It was a cartoon in the 80s, and he just thought it was a cartoon. He had no idea what he was taking me to see. And I remember the last scene, the last vignette with Tarna and the ritual of putting on the leathers and the ritual. And if you look at my world, I have knives and swords all over here. I'm fascinated with these, this powerful woman. Even when I think about what kink dress should look like, it's very much grounded in that very first bloom of a woman who came in and she just tore the world apart, and she did it with very little clothing. And it was the sexiest, coolest. I don't know if I ever wanted to be anyone more in my life than I wanted to be Tarna at that moment at 5, which was great. Also, sorry, Dad, look what you did.
See,
The
adults
resonance from the chat is that great music from Don Felder too, and that.
when adults don't pay attention to what's in cartoons. Okay, I have a similar thing. Okay, similar thing. Maybe I'm 6 or so. Japanese primetime kids cartoon called QT Honey, 1973. So I don't have a browser up right now, but if all y'all out there look up on YouTube, QT Honey, 1973, opening credit. It just explains a whole hell of a lot. I'm just going to leave it at that. And the lyrics also is quite saucy. And the adults in my life just let me watch cartoons. And every time her clothes came flying off, I'd stare to see if I could see something I couldn't see before. So, Cutie Honey, 1973.
Ah, there we are.
Oh my God. Are you seeing it?
I found the Wikipedia entry, so I feel like that'll be safe enough to paste to the chat. Similarly, imprinting at a young age with parents not, my parents used to give me $1 so I could go and buy 4 comics at the drugstore when we'd be out and about. And 2 of my favorite comics were The Warlord, and also Red Sonja. And you want to talk again about the, really they're wearing it because it gives them more agility and they can be faster to do that kind of thing. That's the idea behind it. But again, that whole, power dynamics going back and forth.
I remember, okay, so all the childhood imprinting, right? Oh, by the way, Cutie Honey, also like femme top with fabulous outfits, with a kind of pretty but doofus boyfriend that she constantly had to rescue. It's a nice twist, right? And it's 1973. I would spend my little pocket money to go buy Japanese manga, right? And that's like this thick, and monthly publication. But there was one storyline that I loved. And in hindsight, I realized it was a reinterpretation of Little Shop of Horror. So there was this very fine-featured, honestly, goth haughty man who owned a flower shop. And his sidekick, shorter boy, who was always star-eyed at flower shop owner. And their flower planters were long, rectangular, and about 6 feet long. And so there was this very strong homoerotic stuff going on. Death, murder, homoeroticism, and gender ambiguous masculine beauty. But it was available in girls' comic books.
Yeah, and that's become, that has become just about mainstream, in a lot of the anime that's out there right now. And given that there is more representation in all those aspects of things, is there anything that you wish that there was more representation of? Like we've come far enough to where people are like, oh yeah, they're, it's a same-sex couple married to each other. Not a big leap. They're into kinky stuff. Okay, whatever. We may laugh a little bit, but it's there. For the most part, you can see that in mainstream culture in a lot of places. What aren't we seeing that we should see more of?
I want to see more of the flirtation and the seductions. And I think that's why the Borg and Data scene just like really worked for me, because there was this push and pull of desire, right? It wasn't just that bat eyes, and next thing they're in the sack and it, fade to black through the tunnel. but yeah, that the tension, right, where the power goes back and forth. That would be lovely. I would also love to see masculine of any gender individuals um, in strong submission position. Um, I will say that what was it, the masked figure that Tom Hardy plays?
Bane.
Oh, Bane.
Bane, Bane was like fucking power bottom, power submissive, devoted, fucking badass masculine. I'd like to see more of that. And so, yeah, I think of Bane as like, yeah, that's a service relationship.
Nice.
That's some of my wish.
How about you, Dana?
Better sex toys.
Oh, I just like to see more sex. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. At the end of, it was one of the reasons why I really enjoyed Laura's first book in her series was because like there was so much just regular old having sex and people were enjoying every second of it. And it was mutual and together. Even in the scenes that were violent and dominant, it was still just so hot all the way through. So I would love some sex-heavy books that are not porn, but actually stories. Like I can read porn all day long, but I would love to read the stories and the character, the depth and the richness, along with the fucking. I mean, that's what I would like to see.
And the personalities and the relational dynamic comes into the sex life. Oh, and for the viewers, Laura Antonou, that's spelled, it's like Anton IOU is how I remember it. And the series is The Marketplace. Marketplace is one word. And the audio series has a really good voice. So the book has like some sort of an English voice.
Oh, are you kidding me? Like that's gonna kill me.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for accurate BDSM kink queer representation that is set in the present and is also a murder mystery spoof is The Killer Wore Leather. What else I'd love to see is kinky ass speculative fiction set in a Latinx centered world. Not in Euro-centered world.
A Memory Called Empire, A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martin. Yeah, that might be what you're looking for actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think it's called Memory Called Empire was the first one. But it is one where they don't do the, hey, it's far future and everything is exactly the same as it is now. Everything's different, and yeah, that would definitely have that in it. I'll also recommend. Altered Carbon. Is a big TV show. But I was into it before it was cool. Richard K. Morgan is the author. And he wrote the Altered Carbon books, which is this hard ass, badass Takeshi Kovacs hero. He wrote all these books, and it just became this big hit, especially amongst the macho guys who liked action stuff. And then he came out with a trilogy of fantasies, and they were your typical Conan the Barbarian, badass swordsman with sidekicks and things like that, with one slight difference, which is that Conan was basically from San Francisco. He was the gay leather man, absolutely the best swordsman ever, buff and unapologetically gay. His sidekick was a woman who was a princess, also a badass swordswoman and unapologetically gay. And then they had one straight friend who was a sidekick, and he was kind of there for comic relief. And he wrote this trilogy, and it is high fantasy. It has all the action scenes you want, and then it's got a bunch of gay sex in it as well. And I just enjoyed the thought of all of the sort of dude bros heads exploding because they're their badass author had dared to, take this trope and move it and do it so well. So, The Steel Remains is the first one by Richard K. Morgan. That's what I would recommend.
I'm pulling out some things from my bookshelf, some of my favorites. The Collected Bondage Fairies.
Oh yeah, Bondage Fairies. Yes.
Yeah. Hard to find. It's hot, and
that is a weird book.
This one is historical speculative fiction. It is set in Edo period Japan. Now, during the Edo period, Japan closed down to all foreign trade, except for a couple of places where, like, the Dutch were allowed in. The premise of the story is, what if, instead of it being a political power, that suddenly in Japan an illness wiped out most of the men, and then there's a power shift where the dominant gender are women, and men, out of the scarcity, are treated as hothouse flowers. And oh yeah, it's hot. It is the sword fighting fiction Edo period with. Okay, this is totally decent, and I can show this. This is the bedroom sequence where the lady of the manor has taken a lover, and he's going, but no.
How could I possibly? Is that in Japanese, or is it translated?
It is. I don't know if it's translated, and it's called O-Oku. And so it is quite exciting in that there's this power shift, and it's a soap opera. It's essentially a soap opera with speculating of, what if the country closed down and they pretended to the rest of the world that everything was fine while they were having a complete social shift?
Oh, wow.
Nice.
They did a live action version of it, but I don't think it's as good as the comic book. And it's several episodes of it, several issues. And the costuming, the outfit, everything is historically accurate, but with this whole idea of a gender shift.
Nice. The question came up in chat. Is there anything coming up, book, TV, or movie that you're looking forward to, that you are anticipating is going to be enjoyable in those respects?
I'm just looking forward to being in a theater.
I took my son today to a movie, and it was our first movie in a theater with other people. It was weird.
Yeah.
It was weird.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
No, I said I am looking forward to. Well, I mean, Godzilla and King Kong already went past, and that was kind of like my focus for life for 2021. And now I don't really know what's coming up other than kind of crappy Marvel movies. So I'm just kind of hanging about waiting to see what's next.
Love, Sex, Robot.
Oh, I love that show. And that's amazing.
The second installment came out.
Yep.
So good. And if there's a third, I'll love it. I'm also, of course, waiting for Discovery. But yeah, Love, Sex, Robot. Very impressive.
Yes. I would love to see, it unfortunately hasn't been out, but I'm hoping someday she'll write a sequel. Cameron Hurley wrote a book that's called The Stars Are Legion, but the premise in it, I mean, it is not even a case where the men got wiped out. It is just a culture that there is no male gender. It is, everyone is women. And so it actually, and it's a space opera, and it's a sort of one of those bioships, so it's probably the stickiest, gushiest space opera you've ever heard of. But the funny part about it is that one of the criticisms of it was somebody said, "Oh, this is terrible. It's just lesbians in space." And so she had alternate covers made, that same art, same font, same everything, except instead of saying "the stars are legion," it says "lesbians in space." And then you can get those as a perk on her website. And the thing is, it's also just a really fantastic, rollicking space, attacking, boarding ships and combat kind of thing. And I just want to see more in that universe. But it so far has been a one-off. So that's what I would like to see more of, Cameron Hurley's work.
And I'm going to say lesbians in space sounds like the best space ever.
Yeah. J.S. Hayden bought Gideon the Ninth was lesbian necromancers in space.
Oh.
Yeah, definitely.
I kind of dropped off from watching it, but the new She-Ra series.
Oh, yeah.
I have not seen that.
Okay, really impressive in terms of representation, diversity, badassery, and kindness.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh. That
And
is
it just
something to see
gives
much
me
of.
hope for generations to come. That, you and I and the three of us here have our childhood imprinting, right? And that if She-Ra is imprinting next generations, yay.
Yeah, that's why I think that I'm kind of despaired of, the past generation, but I think that the next one's going to be a little bit better. And we just need to not ruin things for them until we get there.
Are there questions from the Twitch side of the universe?
Yeah, I'm just checking in with them.
Yeah.
I will say also, I've been doing a bad job. Don't tell the board of directors. We are actually here not just to talk, but also to help raise funds for the Worldbuilders work. And Worldbuilders has very much wants to improve the representation and ability for us to build a better world for everybody, regardless of gender or orientation. Some of the work that we have done is during the pandemic, we had fundraisers that donated money to, among other things, the Okra Project in New Orleans, which provided meals for trans people who were affected by the pandemic disproportionately. So that's one of the ways that we do things. And if you look through the perks that we have in that website down there, you'll also find a beautiful T-shirt design that is our World Builders Pride shirt, and we are donating half of all the proceeds from that shirt to LGBTQIA plus community centers. So, all right, and it looks like the chat is just happy that you're here. So,
Yay!
yeah.
And nice for the Twitch folks. I'm sorry I can't see you, but I'm out there in the world as @Planet Midori. So hope to see y'all there. I am so delighted to get to nerd out with y'all. Oh my God.
It's quite the pleasure. I also want to say, although I did put sexologist and educator up there, you're also an artist, and your Patreon, which has been up there next to your lovely face right up there, patreon.com/Planet Midori is a great thing to have that. And
Yeah.
Dana, where can people find out about your performances and directing? And you're always working on a new play of some kind. I know that.
So because I am of the older generation, a lot of my stuff is actually on Facebook. I do put some things on Twitter. I'm on Twitter as Raging Journey. But I do quite a bit of theater here in Madison and parts of the Midwest. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
I am not internationally known, though I'm known to rock the microphone.
I'm over here going, oh, I haven't read that in a while. Oh yeah, she takes a pretty boy concubine. Oh, that's nice.
And Dana, what is your do you know what your Facebook handle is?
It's my name. I'm not fancy, y'all.
I think you're fancy. Well, thank you both for being part of this, and Dana, certainly thank you for all of your work with the with World Builders. It is vastly appreciated on so many levels. And I did find your Facebook thing, and I love that you have I love your banner that you have there with Shikari on there. We are, let's hope that we can continue to help building a better world and making this work out. Thank you both for the work that you've done in that, and thanks for showing up here as well.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, all your viewers, open your virtual wallets.
Yes.
Okay. Rain, let it rain.
That is one version of asking people to give money that we have not used yet. So I'll have to see if I can get Jamie to make a little animation with our little World Builders bar for the Dracus to do that.
And if it makes you feel better to build like an animated dresser, you can leave the money on the dresser.
Yeah.
Yes.
In the tip jar, right.
Yes.
Right over there.
Little virtual garter belt, little virtual jock strap.
That's what we need to have. We need to have a king killer pole dancing class. All right. Well, when we sign off here, we used to say "vivamus," the Latin term for "let us live," but that became too predictable. So now it's always some kind of a version of a moose. And I think for this particular one, we will say "kinky moose." And then when we see it in the chat, we'll know that we can sign off.
All right. Can you kinky moose it?
Yep. They have kinky moose tits. Thank you, everybody.